Chapter 3, The Torrance Tornado. Here's a picture of Louie and Pete. It happened every Saturday. Louie went to the track, limbered up, lay in the infield visualizing his coming race, then walked to the line, awaiting the pop of the gun, and sprang away. Pete dashed around the infield, yelling instructions. When Pete gave the signal, Louie stretched out his legs and opponents scattered behind him. Louie glided over the line. Pete tackled him and the kids in the bleachers cheered and stomped. Louie won so many wristwatches, the traditional prize of track, that he handed them out all over town. Louie's supreme high school moment came in the 1934 Southern California Track and Field Championship. Running in the best field of high school milers ever assembled, he routed them all and smoked the mile in 4 minutes 21 seconds, 0.3 millisecond, 4 minutes 21.3 seconds, shattering the national high school record. His main pursuer so exhausted himself that he had to be carried from the track. A reporter predicted that Louie's record would stand for 20 years. It stood for 19. Once his hometown's arch-villain, Louie was now a superstar, and Torrance forgave him everything. The Los Angeles Times was striped with stories on the Torrance tornado. Rumor had it that the Torrance Herald insured Louie's legs for $50,000. Torrancers carpooled to his races and crammed the grandstands. Embarrassed, Louie asked his parents not to come. Louise snuck to the track fence anyway, but got so nervous she covered her eyes. Not long ago, Louie's aspirations had been satisfied by robbing kitchens. Now he latched on to a wildly ambitious goal, qualifying for the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. The games had no mile race, so milers ran 1,500 meters, a little short of a mile. It was a seasoned man's game. Most milers peaked in their mid to late 20s. The 1,500-meter favorite was Glenn Cunningham, who set the mile record, 4 minutes, 6.7 seconds, just after Louie set the high school record. For comparison, Louie's was 4:21.3. So, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that is a lot when you're talking Olympic level competition. At the 36 games, Cunningham would be almost 27 and wouldn't peak until he was 28. In 1936, Louie would only be 19. But Louie was improving so quickly, he'd lopped a staggering 42 seconds off his mile time in 2 years. Track experts thought he might be the exception to the rule, and after he went undefeated in his senior season, their confidence was strengthened. Louie and Pete believed he could make the team. Louie wanted to run in Berlin more than he'd ever wanted anything. In December 1935, Louie graduated from high school, and days later rang in 1936 with his thoughts full of Berlin 7 months away. He was buried in college scholarship offers. Pete, now at the University of Southern California, urged Louie to choose USC but delay entry until fall so he could train. Louie moved into Pete's frat house and, with Pete coaching him, trained obsessively for Berlin. I have 2 pictures. The first one says, Louie shatters the national high school mile record at the 1934 Southern California Track and Field Championship. Look how much further ahead he is from the other runner behind him. And then the second one, and I want you to really look at this one, says, Louie's track shoes. In these shoes, he never lost a race. Look at how these shoes are constructed. Look at the soles of the shoes. Now consider trying to run really, really fast in a pair of shoes that are made like this. How much faster do you think Louie could run in a modern pair of track shoes? Be interested to know. By spring, he realized he wasn't going to make it. Though he was getting faster every day, he couldn't force his body to improve quickly enough to catch his 1,500-meter rivals by summer. He was simply too young. He was heartbroken. In May, Louis was leafing through a magazine when he saw a story on the Compton Open, a prestigious track meet to be held on May 22nd. The headliner in the 5,000 meter was a 26-year-old Norman Bright, America's record-smashing machine. America's second fastest 5,000 meter man behind Don Lash, a 23-year-old record-smashing machine. America would send 3 5,000 meter men to Berlin, and Lash and Bright were considered locks. Pete urged Louis to enter Bright's race. If you stay with Norman Bright, he said, you make the Olympic team. The idea was a stretch. The mile was 4 laps. The 5,000 was more than 12, 3 miles and 188 yards. Louis had only twice raced beyond a mile, and the 5,000, like the mile, was dominated by much older men. He had only 2 weeks to train, and with the Olympic trials in July, 2 months to become America's youngest elite 5,000 man. But he had nothing to lose. He trained so hard his foot bled. The race was a barn burner. Louis and Bright flew off, leaving the field far behind. Lap after lap they dueled, trading the lead and sending roars through the crowd. They turned into the final home stretch together, and with the crowd screaming, finished almost dead even. In the fastest 5,000 run in America in 1936, Bright had won by a glimmer. In June, after Louis performed brilliantly in 2 more 5,000s, an invitation to the Olympic trials arrived. His Berlin dream was on again. On July 3rd, 1936, residents of Torrance gathered to see Louis off to the Olympic trials in New York. They gave him a wallet and traveling money, a train ticket, and a suitcase emblazoned with the words, Torrance Tornado. Fearing the suitcase made him look brash, Louis discreetly stuck adhesive tape over the nickname, then set off. He spent the journey introducing himself to every pretty girl on the train. Would you like to see a picture of the suitcase? It says, the suitcase presented to Louis by the city of Torrance upon his departure for the 1936 Olympics. And true to words, I don't see the words Torrance Tornado on here. I'm wondering if maybe it's on the back side. But if you look very carefully, I don't know if you'll be able to see it in this recording or not. It does say Louis Zamperini right here. Look at all the stickers. That used to be a thing people did. You'd get a sticker when you traveled, and so they'd stick them to their suitcase, and you could see how much somebody had traveled. I think that's kind of nice. When the train doors opened in New York, Louis felt he was walking into an inferno. It was the hottest summer on record in America, and New York was especially hard hit. In 1936, air conditioning was a rarity, found only in a few theaters and department stores, so escape was nearly impossible. That week, the heat would kill 3,000 Americans, 40 of them in New York, where it hit 106 degrees. In spite of the heat, Louis had to train. Sweating profusely day and night, training in the sun, unable to sleep in the heat, virtually every athlete lost a huge amount of weight. By one estimate, no athlete lost less than 10 pounds. One virtually moved into an air-conditioned theater, buying tickets to movies and sleeping through every showing. Louis was as miserable as everyone else. His weight fell precipitously. The pre-race newspaper coverage riled him. Don Lash was considered unbeatable. Bright was pegged for second. Louis wasn't mentioned. He was daunted by Lash, but the first 3 runners would go to Berlin, and he believed he could be among them. If I have any strength left from this heat, he wrote to Pete, I'll beat Bright and give Lash the scare of his life. The trials were held at a stadium on New York's Randall Island. It was just short of 90 in the city, but the stadium was much hotter, probably far over 100 degrees. Everywhere, athletes were keeling over and being carted to hospitals. Louis waited for his race under a scalding sun that, he later said, made a wreck of me. At last, the men were told to line up. The gun cracked, and the race was on. Lash bounded to the lead with Bright in pursuit. Louis dropped back. In the Zamperini house, a throng crouched around the radio. They were in agony. Louis' start time had passed, but the announcer was lingering on the swimming trials. Pete was so frustrated he considered putting his foot through the radio. At last, the announcer listed the positions of the 5,000-meter runners. He didn't mention Louis. Overwhelmed, Louise fled to the kitchen. Lash and Bright led the runners through laps 7, 8, 9. Louis hovered mid-pack, waiting to make his move. The heat was suffocating. One runner collapsed, and the others hurdled him. Another dropped, and they jumped him too. Louis could feel his feet cooking as the spikes on his shoes conducted heat up from the track. Bright's feet were burning particularly badly. In terrible pain, he took a staggering step off the track and twisted his ankle, then lurched back on. Louis passed him, and he had no resistance to offer. As the runners entered the final lap, Louis accelerated, closing in on Lash. Looking at the bobbing head of the mighty Don Lash, Louis felt intimidated. For several strides, he hesitated. Then he saw the last curve ahead. He opened up as fast as he could go. Banking around the turn, Louis drew alongside Lash, and the two ran side by side down the home stretch. Neither man had any more speed to give, and neither could get past the other. Exhausted, straining, with heads thrown back and legs moving in sync, they hit the line together. The announcer's voice echoed across the living room in Torrance. "Zamperini," he said, had won. In the kitchen, Louise heard the crowd in the next room suddenly shout. Outside, car horns honked. The front door swung open and neighbors gushed in. As a crowd of hysterical Torrancers celebrated around her, Louise wept happy tears. Anthony poured wine and sang out toasts. Louis's voice came over the airwaves, calling a greeting to Torrance. The announcer was mistaken. The judges ruled Lash the winner. The announcer corrected himself, but it hardly dimmed the revelry in Torrance. A few minutes later, Louis stood under a cold shower. His feet were burned, the marks following the patterns of his spikes. After drying off, he weighed himself. He'd sweated off 3 pounds. Norman Bright was slumped on a bench, staring at his foot. It, like the other one, was burned so badly that the skin had peeled off. He'd finished 5th. By day's end, Louis had received some 125 telegrams. "Torrance has gone nuts," read one. "Village has gone screwy," read another. There was even one from the Torrance police, who must have been relieved that someone else was chasing Louis. Louis pored over photos of his race in the evening papers. In some, he appeared tied with Lash. In others, he appeared to be in front. On the track, he'd felt for sure he'd won. The top 3 finishers would go to Berlin, but Louis felt cheated nonetheless. As Louis studied the papers, the judges were reviewing photos and film of the 5,000. Later, Louis telegrammed the news home. Judges called it a tie. Will run harder in Berlin. The Zamperini's house was packed with well-wishers and newsmen. Anthony drank toast until 4 in the morning. Pete walked around to backslaps. "Am I ever happy," he wrote to Louis. "I have to go around with my shirt open so that I have enough room for my chest." Louis Zamperini was going to compete in the Olympics in an event he'd only run 4 times. He was the youngest distance runner to ever make the team. I have a picture of the end of the race. It says Louis and Lash at the finish line at the 1936 Olympic trials. And you can see exactly what he's saying, can't you? Because looking at this picture, it looks like Louis is in front. But it's hard to say because of the angle. Gosh, can you imagine running in a heat so hot that the metal spikes in the bottom of your shoes burn your feet? Alright, see you guys again for chapter 4.